stories from across the world in Gravitas Images as always. But first, to Myanmar and India. July 7th, 2013. This date is important. On that day, 9 blasts rocked the Mahabodhi temple complex in Bodh Gaya in Bihar. There were 7 targets, including the Mahabodhi tree, the Turga monastery, a Buddha statue, and a tourist bus. Fortunately, since it was early in the day, only 5 injuries were reported. A little over 3 months later, police in Chhattisgarh picked up Umair Siddiqui of the Students Islamic Movement. He confessed that the blasts were linked to the killing of Rohingya in Myanmar. On October 27th, 6 people were killed, 85 others injured when 8 blasts rocked a rally being addressed by then Chief Minister, now Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Patna. Forensic analysis established similarities between the Bodh Gaya and Patna blasts. Clearly, the Bodh Gaya conspirators saw Myanmar and India as enemies. Cut to February 2017, that's this year, Myanmar's visiting National Security Advisor Yu Thuong Tun was told that Pakistan's Lashkar was involved in radicalizing members of the community. An official was quoted as saying, and I'm quoting here, Rohingya radicals are being abetted by Lashkar. This will have consequences for the region, and we have advised them to find a political solution to this issue soon. In fact, Lashkar Chief Hafiz Saeed has accused India of aiding Myanmar against the Rohingya. Intelligence inputs from Bangladesh confirmed the Lashkar link. The military chief of the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army is one Hafiz Tohar, who trained in Pakistan. He maintains close ties with the Lashkar-e-Toiba, and phone intercepts have revealed him discussing attack plans with ISI officials, no less. He is suspected to have orchestrated attacks on the Myanmar army and police last October and recently in August. Recruitment for the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army is happening in Rakhine State in Myanmar and across the border in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar, where thousands of Rohingya refugees are camped. These camps have come up in the dense jungles of the Chittagong hill tracts to train the new recruits. The hill tracts border Bangladesh and India's Tripura state, and this could spell trouble not only for Myanmar but also for India. It could impact the range of development projects India is providing Myanmar, including $1 million for reconstruction and reconciliation in the Rakhine state. India's other projects in Myanmar involve building linkages with Mizoram, Manipur and Nagaland, eastern states, northeastern states, all of which border Myanmar. Equally, it could hit China, which is taking a reported 70% stake in a special economic zone in Rakhine state, where it plans to build a deep-sea port and oil and gas terminal. Joining us this evening on Gravitas from Beijing, Ainar Thangan, political and economic commentator. From New Delhi, Vivek Kajju, former Indian diplomat, former ambassador to Myanmar, and Than Nguyen Thun, chief of the Burmese Service Voice of America. He is with us from Washington. Good evening to everyone. Vivek Kajju, to you first. How significant are these revelations? This is a time bomb ticking on India's eastern frontier.
I think they are very significant because from the Indian viewpoint, we already face a very difficult situation from terrorism on our western borders, and now if the Rohingyas are radicalized and terrorist groups are formed among them, then it will assume a significant threat to India. And naturally, as we see from these reports, the Pakistanis are fishing in troubled waters, as they always do. So this is something that our security agencies will have to monitor very closely.
Ainar, how does China view these developments and this crisis, given the kind of investments it has in Myanmar?
Beijing's position is that they do not get involved in internal strife. They are quite clear about this. They do not judge. If they're dealing with a government that is legitimately elected, they deal with that. So they are not taking position. for the Rohingya or against them. They're simply dealing on a trade basis with Myanmar.
All right, that's convenient. Thantun, with the role of foreign players in fomenting terror becoming clear, do you believe that the world will begin to see the full picture? There's a lot of criticism for the government of Myanmar for not doing enough to prevent this crisis. Its own people are being forced to flee their homes, but there is another side that is operating here.
Yeah, to be honest, first thing I have to clear that all this, what you said, the evidence, we just learned that about 3-4 days ago from a local newspaper article written by the Calcutta-based journalist called Subia Bomik. He used to be a BBC correspondent. So it is the only source we learn about ISIS, Pakistani intelligence, and ISIS involvement with the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army attack on that Burmese security force. So although we have a stringer in the ground and in Burma, these are not our first-hand information or source. So, but the way that those attacks being carried out and a kind of a simultaneous attack on the nearly 30 stations, there must have been some sort of support from outside a terrorist cell, and I feel that Myanmar government has correctly named it as a kind of a terrorist attack, and they see this as a terrorist attack and then a response in the way they are doing. So for the moment, our observation is that international attention is very much on the humanitarian crisis. They look at it a lot on more than 100,000 refugees, Rohingya refugees arrive in Bangladesh. That's what I see.
Vivek Karju, do you agree that the world has failed to see the full picture and Pakistan is trying to milk a crisis to create new terror launch pads?
Of course, this is true. After all, the problems in Rakhine are historical in nature. They are not confined, these kinds of problems are not confined only to the Rohingyas. There are other people of Indian origin who are in Myanmar who too are stateless, and they too have problems. But none of them have taken to arms, or no groups have formed to foment terrorism among them. So, while the flow of refugees has to be staunched, while, as our Prime Minister said during his recent visit to Myanmar, the interests of all stakeholders must be taken into account, and we are confident that the Myanmar authorities, and especially Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, will focus on this purposefully. Yet, the very fact that there are linkages between the Rohingya radicals and between Pakistani terror groups, and these are not of recent origin. These reports have been current for a number of years, and that now they are assuming a dimension, especially since last year, when attacks on Myanmar army establishments started. We are in a different situation. And my final point, to link all this violence or taking up of arms and fomenting violence to persecution is, I think, missing the point.
Pakistan, of course, is calling it state-led genocide of the Rohingya Muslims. Ainar, the Pakistani foreign minister is in Beijing, and for the past 2 days he's been waxing eloquent about how more needs to be done to avoid international embarrassment, more needs to be done to combat terrorism emanating from Pakistani soil. Do you believe that the issue of Pakistani involvement in Myanmar will come up in discussions with Khwaja Asif?
Well, I would reiterate what my colleague at Voice of America said. You have one source at this point who has verbally said that he thinks that this is happening. You cited a number of cases where it was intelligence was leading towards this. But the fact is, these are stateless people who have been, in fact, demonized, not only in Myanmar, but in other areas. And when you create a large underclass like that, and they feel that they are being moved forcibly from their homes, yes, you are providing a very, very good breeding ground for terrorist activities. I am a person who does not believe that any aim justifies terrorism, but I can understand that if you provide the right circumstances, you are going to get terrorism. So India has to ask itself, does it want to be allied with a group who is fomenting the creation of fertile ground for this kind of movement?
Thantun, I want you to respond to that, and I also want to ask you, where does this leave the government of Myanmar and the refugees? Are they collateral damage as the government tries to root out safe haven for terrorists, or could the government have done more to help the people who've been forced to flee their homes?
Yeah, the situation has developed in a different aspect in the past a few months, especially after the security posts were attacked by the extremists. First of all, these people are very poor, and this is a kind of a good breeding ground for the radicalization, of course. So there's definitely attacking on the security post is a terrorist attack anyway. So that's why government has to respond in a way that the way every government's response on a terrorist. So the so-called clearance of operations, I don't know the extent of how they're being conducted on that kind of things in the area. We don't see that yet, but there must have citing that the previous history of the bad reputation or history of the Burmese army, there has been some sort of evidence that burning of the villages and then harassments and arrests and that sort of things. So a lot of people, especially Muslim and Rohingyas, they are very fearful about this kind of reprisal, and then they are fleeing on the way that out of fears. At the same time, terrorists, they are not terrorizing only in the I feel that their intention is to terrorize the communities, not only one communities, both communities. So indigenous Rakhine people in a region has to flee from the village as well. So the Myanmar government has a kind of dilemma to present the whole things and how they handle that to counter the terrorism in which way or should they allow international observer to see how do they handle the things, or allow this sort of international investigation mission over there or something like that. They're a little bit confused. But as a journalist, I actually want freedom of kind of access to information, or to see the situation on our own eye and report to the international community.
Vivek Karju, a word on India's position. The government for the first time has called these people terrorists, and Emma's Home, Kiran Rijiju among others have repeatedly made it very clear that these refugees will have to go back wherever they came from. But this is not just about a refugee problem or a problem being faced by India's neighbor. This is a potential security issue for India as well, given Pakistan's involvement.
I think as far as the Rohingya refugees are concerned, the government of India has a consistent position on refugees and those who have come in illegally, and that they must go back when the situation is right. They must go back to their respective countries. And in that sense, I think what the government spokesmen are articulating these days is perfectly fair. As far as the security aspect is concerned, of course, it's there, and we've had problems in the past from Bangladesh, and now with this aspect coming up of terror groups being formed among the Rohingyas, obviously we will have to take all that, our security agencies will have to take all that extremely seriously, and it's a matter of grave concern. So, on the one hand, while it will be good to counsel the government of Myanmar that they've got to handle the situation with some degree of sympathy. Aung San Suu Kyi has herself said that they are interested in implementing the Kofi Annan recommendations speedily and as far as it's possible. I think that should be done. But on the other hand, the security aspects of this situation certainly cannot be neglected by anyone in the region.
Einar, you've said that China doesn't want to comment on what happens in other countries, which is an interesting observation. But do you not see Beijing getting worried about the kind of investments it has in this region and how they may be affected if this fire flares further, if it spreads, and Pakistan's involvement?
Well, you're drawing a line that has not been evidenced. I don't think one reporter and a handful of conversations necessarily connect Pakistan to this group. But if it does, the issue is going to be more about religion. You know, what you're talking about here is the Rohingya are Muslim, and you have predominantly Hindu or other religions which are saying that they don't want them around. I'm just telling you, very frankly, the Chinese government does not get involved in internal affairs. This is their position. But to the extent that they have, obviously, investments there, they're going to be looking at the situation very, very carefully. From India's point of view, I don't think it's wise to start villainizing an entire population because of some portion of it. If what you say is the logic, then in the United States, Donald Trump would be justified in basically throwing out every single Muslim out of the United States simply because a few Muslims have involved themselves in terrorist activities. Some of them are connected to Pakistan. I mean, there would be no end to this. You would have a worldwide religious war involving over 1 billion people. I don't think that that is the answer to peace.
Mr. Karju, I'm told you want to come in?
I think I must come in. Yes, I do. I think there is no attempt on anyone's part to demonize Islam or Muslims. Far from it. As far as India is concerned, we have a very significant Muslim population, and we are familiar with all facets of Islam. I think the focus has to be on the fact that a certain radicalization is taking place among the Rohingyas, and some of them are forming groups that are wedded to violence. And certainly that aspect cannot be looked upon with equanimity. Now, once you go down the ground of justification, once you start the argument of a breeding ground for terror, then I am afraid you are on a very, very slippery slope, because subjective factors there then come in and things will go out of hand. So terrorism has to be condemned completely.
Absolutely.
It's not acceptable.
Absolutely. I'm looking at two reports, interestingly. Before I thank you all, I want to tell you this. Pakistan, the government of Pakistan has urged Myanmar to take necessary measures to protect the rights of Rohingya Muslims. And the second report says that the Rohingya population in Karachi remains marginalized without the very basic rights that a citizen should get. So that's something that Pakistani government perhaps should also look at. I'm going to thank you all for joining us here. Okay, I'm told, Thantun, you want to make a point?
Oh, yes, I'd like to add only one point about China positions on the situation. Because of that, they have major investment in the Arakan state. Definitely, they don't want to see that instability in the region. And what I was talking about, that, for example, like a huge gas pipeline and their investment in the oil and gas industry in the Arakan state. So it is a kind of a major, what I call, energy source for the Yunnan province and then an outlet for China. So the instability in Arakan state, China definitely a bit worried about that. And also another point I'd like to make is that repatriation issue. Although Burma is now saying that they would like to receive those people who didn't involve in that terrorist attack can go home or something like that. But in practical, I don't think it will be happening soon, mainly because now they are refugees in the other country across the border. But in what status they have to go back? They have to go back in a kind of a stateless status back in their home, because they are not, they will not be received as a kind of a citizen. Burma citizens' law is very, very tough to be a Burmese citizen. So this is one of the issues I like to add, and it is our observation. The situation is very complex. Adding is that terrorism elements, which is recently added to.
But as INR insists, China does not like to interfere in the affairs of other countries, which frankly INR is news to me. But thanks very much for joining us here. Tantun, Vivek Karjo, INR Tangan, appreciate you all joining us. Now, violence in Myanmar has not only pushed Rohingya Muslims, but also Hindus from their homes to Bangladesh. WION's Dhaka Bureau Chief Saad Hamadi travelled to Cox's Bazar and he visited the Hindu communities who have sheltered the migrants in these border areas. Take a look at this report.
We have heard about Rohingya Muslims coming from Myanmar to Bangladesh, fleeing the persecution that they have been facing for decades. But we have not heard much about the Hindus from Myanmar who have been fleeing the similar persecution and have sought shelter in Bangladesh in the similar places across Ukhia and Cox's Bazar. One of such persons is Chittaranjan Pal, who we are going to speak to.
An insurgent group has waged a movement against the government in Myanmar. We moved to Bangladesh in the face of their atrocities. This group had confined us for 8 days in our village and did not let us go outside for groceries or even to get water. After some days, we got to know that they had killed many Burmese Hindus in Fakira Bazar, which is 2 kilometers away from our village.
An estimated 500 Hindus have fled to Bangladesh since the violence erupted in Myanmar. The Myanmar government identifies the Hindus as Indians.
The Burmese government gave us a card which says we are Indian. We go by that card.
The misery of identification does not end there. Since the violence erupted in the last week of August, insurgent groups in Myanmar have killed at least 86 members of their community.
They hacked my husband to death, looted my house and husband's jewelry store. They had black outfits and faces covered, so we could not identify them. They killed all the people of my area. A Muslim family helped us to escape to this camp because we promised them we would convert to their religion.
The flight of so many Rohingya and Hindus to Bangladesh has sent prices of essentials such as rice soaring. Even plastic sheets and bamboo for building makeshift shelters have shot up.
The cost of living has increased in Ukhia, Cox's Bazar. This is one of the most impoverished areas of Bangladesh. The camps of plastic sheets and bamboos are increasing every passing hour. This has also increased some business for the locals here. On the other end, the Myanmar migrants say they're pushed into the misery for no fault of theirs. Whether it is the insurgents or the Myanmar army, these people are simply victims of a bloody civil war in Myanmar. In Ukhia, Cox's Bazar, Saad Hamadi, WION.